Welcome to San Diego Integral, May 11th, 2024. Our topic today, exploring what might be next for Integral, Tibetan Buddhist Contemplations on how to integrate even further and avoid integral fundamentalism, presented by Lama Pema Dragpa. Hello everyone. Hi, and welcome to San Diego Integral. I'm Jerry Golick. I'm a member of San Diego Integral's leadership team. Before we get started, I do want to hand it over to Tom for just a minute to say a few words about the upcoming ICON conference. So, Tom?
Thank you, Jerry. As many of you know, ICON is going to be in Denver this Thursday. Can't believe it. I say that, I have a panic attack. I'm really excited. I mean, so many people came and stood up and got things down. We got wonderful speakers and a format that's going to really give time for dialogue. The evening program, who our own San Diego Integral, Karen Voorhees, developed, is going to have ecstatic dancing. I don't know if any of you have ever done ecstatic dancing before, but I last about 15 minutes and I got to go out and have a puff of my asthma medication. But it's going to be an exciting conference. I'm really happy for a first-time conference in this size in the States in quite a while. It's working. So I'll put the link in the chat if you are interested, coming online or attending in person. Thank you, Jerry.
All right, thanks, Tom. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. And at this point, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Eloy, who is going to introduce our speaker for today.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Lama Pema Dragpa. He's a distinguished member of both the Integral and Buddhist communities. I've met him several times in Integral life study groups, and I know him as Dragpa, so I don't go. I didn't even know he had the formal name of Lama. I was just like, my buddy Dragpa, right? But he's enriched our Integral life study groups with his deep wisdom, insights, and compassion, and he just keeps it very interesting and brings a lot to the discussions and elicits a lot as well. Since 2004, he's been a resident Dharma teacher at the Padma-Sam. Maybe I'll have you say that. Padma-Sami Ling?
Padma-Sami Ling, yeah.
Okay. And has edited over 25 books on Buddhist philosophies and meditation. And Dragpa has also authored a book called The Integral View of Tibetan Buddhism, blending Eastern traditions with Western thought, particularly with the work of Ken Wilber, which Dragpa studied since 1999. So please join me in welcoming Dragpa as we anticipate an engaging talk on integrating ancient wisdom with future possibilities.
Warm greetings, friends. I feel like I've entered a bit of a family here. So it feels very cozy to me. I'm honored to be able to come into this space with you all and to just take a moment to really look at everyone's face and kind of cue in a little bit. It's always nice. So I think we'll just jump right in, if that's all right. I'm coming from a Tibetan Buddhist view. Tibetan Buddhist, like kind of very traditional, going back to 8th century with Guru Padmasambhava. And then also, as this group, San Diego Integral honors obviously the work of Ken Wilber, his integral meta-theoretical work. So with much gratitude, appreciation, love, respect, celebration for the work of Ken Wilber and for other people who've run with some amazing brilliance. So with deep gratitude and appreciation for kind of both of these streams. And then to just jump right in, I'm kind of assuming some degree of a familiarity with Wilberian integral, and I can just call it integral and assume like let's refer to that as like Ken Wilber's kind of like blossoming work. And so I'm assuming that. that we all have a little bit of familiarity. So what I'd like to do to begin with, in terms of Buddhism in general and Tibetan Buddhism in particular, it always starts right with the mind and with the heart. So in this moment, like, how am I coming into this space? Like, how am I feeling in my body? What's the motivation? Like, why am I here? Why did I show up? And so Buddhism always tries to really, of all the motivations we could have, of all the ways we could frame experience, it very intentionally tries to brightly, clearly, freshly reactivate a motivation of love, compassion, and wisdom. And that's called bodhicitta, the heart mind of enlightenment. This is the main thing I want to kind of discuss and contemplate and kind of feel through and practice a little bit tonight, is bodhicitta. This vast, vast, sincere, like genuine, heartfelt love and longing and concern and appreciation for every being, ourselves included. And so it tries to really, like, at the moment of anything we begin, whether it's study or practice, whether we're standing, walking, lying, sleeping, formally meditating, talking on the phone, always in the Buddhist perspective is to try to, as much as we can, reactivate a motivation of love, compassion, and wisdom. That's the living kind of way that we are engaging our reality, our experience, the world we're in, our own mind and our own heart. Bodhicitta, the heart mind of enlightenment. This is the essential, I mean, many great masters have argued, this is the essential point of all of Buddha's teachings. Bodhicitta, love, compassion, and wisdom. And in terms of integral, I see a lot of similarities and distinctions, but a lot of similarities with the turquoise. Spiral dynamics, a turquoise, kind of a way of, once we've kind of entered the space of integral, and with what's often called teal or yellow in spiral dynamics language, or integral, Wolverian integral, we start to really, like, with such appreciation and relief, connect some of these dots, that our experience doesn't have to be at war with itself. These worldviews, these different perspectives, they don't always have to be one winning and everyone else losing. We don't have to have the so-called first tier constant urge to always be right and to have everyone else be at least a little less right. We don't have to constantly put ourselves at the center of it all and have the world meet us where we're at. So teal or yellow actually starts to see this is a living, interwoven web or a spiral or this field of interdependence that's actively aligning and realigning with itself all the time, in real time, dynamically, as a living system. That's just how reality is. And what teal yellow kind of offers us is it really begins to, like, very clearly map some of these connections of how these different perspectives, how these different enactments, engagements, ways of living, being, thinking, feeling, becoming, loving, grieving, all this richness of life. It begins to see some larger patterns that are really quite generous, and they're quite overall loving and inclusive. They orient towards wholeness, towards further integration. And so to some degree, I'm speaking to the choir here, but in terms of teal yellow, we're at least starting to get some clarified detail of the mapping of what might be some of the really deep through lines, the deep structures, the, like, really rich, bright ways that reality kind of keeps unfurling itself. And so largely, it can just stay there. It can just stay as a really very fascinating and oftentimes very helpful set of meta-theoretical distinctions. And it's brilliant. It's like a brilliant mapping system. And the challenge and or kind of invitation of Buddhism, and I think of integral, is to live it. How do we open from teal yellow? How do we open from this way of cognizing, from understanding this richness, this abundance of reality? And in addition to that, how do we really start in real time, in real life, with ourselves and the ones around us, How do we start really being with each other as the integral impulse of life, as a part of it that we already are? But how do we consciously kind of align ourselves and actively choose that? So that's kind of one of the main threads of inquiry of this time together. Because the challenge is we can do that right now in this moment. We can turn on turquoise. We can turn on bodhicitta. We can turn on love, compassion, and wisdom. Every moment it's always available. And that's so much easier said than done. And I can really relate to that myself. I'm just coming off a 1-month silent retreat with a group of people here at this retreat center in upstate New York. And, you know, easier said than done to be loving, compassionate, and wise. I mean, it's really something we have to stretch into and forgive ourselves for and love, and kind of it's a living rich process to really try to be that in a sustained way over time, to actually live bodhicitta, to live turquoise. But the challenge, the invitation is there, that in this moment we can do that. I can do that. And then the question is how? And that always becomes a question of path. If I'm not in an integrative mode, if I'm not in a really loving, clear-minded, balanced, grounded, centered, curious heart space, how do I get there? How do I turn it on? How do I activate it? And then so that's a question of path, of practices, of supportive circumstances that help us relax or ease into the naturalness that is what Buddhists would argue. That's our natural condition. It's a natural state of heart and mind. To be loving, to be integrative, to include more, to like further and further extend a web or a field of interdependence. That's the natural impulse of bodhicitta, of wisdom and compassion. And so kind of at the beginning of this time together, I offer an invitation to just like we all kind of quietly turn that on. And there's a traditional prayer that Buddhists do. It's called the Four Boundless or the Four Immeasurable Prayer. And I'm going to pop it in the chat here. And it's not that something, you all don't have to say it or anything, but it's there as a reference. But I'll say it out loud. This is just the Four Boundless or the Four Aspiration Prayers. This is just a key way to what's called aspirational bodhicitta, to turn on the aspirational framing, the orientation towards including all beings in a loving, wise way. And so this has been recited for centuries and really thousands of years. May all beings have happiness in the cause of happiness. May all beings be free of suffering in the cause of suffering. May all beings never be separated from supreme happiness, which is without suffering. May all beings remain in boundless equanimity, free from both attachment to close ones and rejection of others. This is called the Four Boundless. They say it's aspirational bodhicitta. This is a practice that people will recite this, contemplate this, try to really activate this as a lived experience. For some people, this is their only practice, to constantly live this way. And then not only in addition to aspiring to have this love and compassion to include all beings, they could be free of all suffering and the causes of suffering. Every single being. They can have happiness and have everything that's needed for the happiness to just naturally arise, to just live in that kind of a wish and that kind of with that longing, that like really heartfelt, grounded sincerity. Also vastness of vision. All beings. So I'm just pause for 10 seconds, kind of be with that. If that's something you want to feel through or you're already in, like just kind of turn that on. The great Buddhist master Patrul Rinpoche said, if you have one thing and only one thing, that will be enough to be enlightened, fully awakened, free of suffering and the causes of suffering. And that one thing is bodhicitta. the heart mind of enlightenment. If they say it's just the natural way that the heart and the mind are, when they're not constricted, when they're not unnaturally kind of seizing up, locking in, fixating. You could say in a certain general way, when they're not locking into a first tier perspective, when they're not putting themselves first and everything else second, when it's much more about us together, we're in this together. And Wilber's outlined this as this me, us, all of us, and it expands. As a bottom line for orange modernity, for like deeply scientific, rational, empirical, like lovers of like the quantifiable aspects, the right-hand quadrant aspects of all reality, we at least have to have world-centric care. All of us. All of us. A healthy orange orients around all of us. And bodhicitta opens that further. Who's the all? Every single being. In every place that beings are, throughout all of space, as small as they might be, as big as they might be, as unknown as they might be to me and my ways of cognizing and sense-making, every single being, to say to care for them as if they're your only child, to have that visceral embodied response, like that I would argue is living turquoise. That's what turquoise is asking of us. And that opens into cosmocentric, not just even beings. Why even be not anthropocentric, human-centric, not even being-centric, but reality. Wilber said that, manifest and unmanifest reality. And the higher teachings, the more esoteric or more kind of actual simple teachings, they include all reality. Manifest and unmanifest reality, body, speech, mind, form, semi-form, formless, visible and invisible. It's a big view of like trying to actually love and care for all of reality throughout space and time. And this is like the place space that Tibetan Buddhism, that's kind of its default mode, to try to be this big of heart and this big of mind. And simply put, it's called love and compassion and wisdom, bodhicitta. And so that's kind of the general orientation I thought to start with, that if that's the only thing I ever said in my whole life, it would be a life worth lived. I mean, it'd be a really good, valuable life. Is to have said the word bodhicitta, to encourage turquoise, to encourage like actually living it, like actually loving that vastly, that closely, that carefully, like full of that much care. And then trying to learn more and more how to attune to others, how to be with others in ways that actually do bring about less suffering, that do uplift and bring more loving, supportive conditions for them on their terms, according to what makes them feel happy. This is all living turquoise. So some of us are about to go to this icon conference or Zoom in, and there's just going to be this overflowing richness of beautiful, amazing, fascinating people and offering insights and like practices, I'm sure, research, kind of. And the thing is, if we don't take this in with a turquoise way of being and just stay strictly teal yellow, this is fascinating stuff. It's a really hard shell that those seeds, that those fascinating, curious insights of actually integrating further, they're just walled in. The pot is just too close. It's too tight. And like to really activate this bodhicitta, this turquoise view, becomes a really urgent love or a passion. For people who really want to like go deeper into what is this integral stuff. And I'm not saying I could do it. I'm saying I have been around beings that obviously seem to have bodhicitta on all the time. And it's just amazing to be around them. And that's kind of further in the inquiry, like what is it like to be around beings like that? What is it like to try to become a being like that for others? And then how do we do that? So that's kind of the first highlight point of this time. It can sound so simple, wisdom and compassion. What else? But if we really open and explore that, really Everything's there in terms of the Buddhist view. It's all there.
Can
And
I ask you a
so,
question, Dragpa?
please, Tom.
You know, we had difficulty connecting with Dragpa to schedule this. And on that first email, I could feel your intention. And it just felt soothing. How the hell does that work? Because we weren't even verbal at that point.
Huh. It's a, I mean, the answer is, it's not me. It's just reality. If we really genuinely just like actually are curious with each other and interested, like if we really take an integral approach, and I'm not saying I do this much, but where it's like you're with someone and it's an opportunity to learn and explore, and the person could be irritating and you could be hangry and it could be just like not the right time. But if we can open ourselves and relax a little and have that internal ease, just soften a bit, and instead, what in the, like, at least even if it doesn't have to be a contemplative, like what is this that's valuable or interesting to me, but just like I offer genuine interest and love and appreciation here. I don't know what it is. I don't have a definitive answer. There's not like there's not a final statement to this mystery, at least in the Buddhist terms. That's often referred to as emptiness. Interdependence is thoroughly interdependence. Everything is utterly relational. There's no final wall, no final thing, no final process. It keeps interweaving interdependence through and through. That's called relative truth. So I don't know. I think, yeah, I don't know. But the thing is, and this is for Buddhists too, and definitely myself, is beginning with an aspirational approach like bodhicitta, as lovely and amazing as it is, we have to like actually start to like be it, to integrate it further. And Buddhists always talk about that as in our body, in our speech, in our mind. Or it's like, sometimes it's called form, body, speech, semi-form, energetic, more vibrational. Mind is formless. Mind is there, awareness is there, but where is it really? What is it really? It's this kind of formless, imperceptible awareness. So always body, speech, mind. We need to like actually saturate our body, speech, and mind with this bodhicitta, this wisdom and compassion. And that brings me to my second point, is bodhicitta always happens inside of a world. We are worlds. Each of us is vast, infinite galaxies of worlds. Right? Halonic theory, Wilbur Halonic theory. It's just you take a set, you take a group, and you zoom in, and you get all these subgroups, and you zoom in, and you get these subgroups, and you zoom in, and you get the subgroups. They're these internested worlds of sense making, of rules, of patterns, of logics, and they reciprocally interact with each other. And if they get unbalanced, they can like disintegrate everything above. And if they take over, you know, there's all kinds of ways that these worlds can interact in ourselves, but we are worlds. And so the point here is, which is a special, like a strong point for Buddhists too, is bodhicitta is not just a technique. It's actually a world. It's a world system that, in terms of integral, I find it's really not asking me to take my life and pop in some integral tips, some techniques that'll basically keep my normal life intact and like give it some updates in certain areas, but basically maintain my first tier, I'm the most important, coolest thing there is. First tier, right? So what bodhicitta, if it's approached only as a technique, it's an amazing technique. But lives, views, they always happen in worlds, in bodies. This is all very now with a lot of modern science, and Professor Viveki is making this much more popular. We're always, cognition is always enmeshed, embodied, extended. It's always in the fabric of reality, which Wilber very clearly pointed out a long time ago. There's always exterior and interior. There's always enfolded and unfolding into. It's just always this interlayered worlds. And so in terms of bodhicitta, what that means is if bodhicitta has a deep concern for others and oneself, and how that actually is happening in real time, in my life right now, with as much as I can include in what I'm experiencing as my life, this room, this body, it can extend further. It can be a lot further if we develop that sensitivity. But it has to include this world. And what Wilber pointed to often is cosmic address. And it can sound technical and boring and fall asleep, or like very stimulating if you're into the like really teal, dazzling, integral semiotics of it all. This cosmic address, where is the subject coming from? What is the perspective that's actually being enmeshed in real time right now? What is the living perspective, the fabric, the layered quadrant, level, line, type, state, polarities, shadows of the other, of the object, of the others, of the ones I'm with? What are the integrative methodologies of communication happening in between? So on the subject, as Sean Esbjørn Hargens, a big integral meta-modeler, says, on the subject, what's the epistemology, the way I'm knowing this experience, this sense-making? What's the object, the ontology, the world? What am I knowing? What are the things I'm knowing? What are the processes I'm a part of, or I'm like actually popping up on my radar? What are the ontologies? And how are they interacting? The methodologies. What are the injunctions that are actually being performed either implicitly or explicitly that allow the world to congeal into this amazing, taken for granted me space, we space that is like being in a human body with things I see and hear and touch. And I have to do almost no work to have this amazing mystery of cognition, embodied cognition, just happen every moment. It's like such a fabulous, fantastic, amazing gift. We all just have this fortune to have this fragile aggregation of all these things coming together to make that happen right now. We totally won the lottery with that. This human embodiment is like a masterful genius artwork that we just like get to be in right now. And we get to be in it together. And somehow this mystery of we can keep happening enough where we can actually all at least click the right things to be on a Zoom call together. This is just crazy. I mean, it's really amazing. And so the point here is there's always worlds coming together. And the bodhicitta, or the wisdom, compassion, impulse, is how do I align with the world you're in? And that's a turquoise thing. How can I align with a cosmic address of where you are according to what I'm available for, what I know, how I am, and what the communication pathways are that are kind of freshly happening? Like, and basically with the integral impulse to optimize it for greater wisdom and compassion, for greater attunement, greater integration, greater enfoldment, greater wholeness, greater loveliness, to keep the integral impulse alive, to like basically be honoring reality as it's happening in its frothy living condition of being real, of being not a map and not a war, but actually a participatory, amazing, mysterious thing that we happen to get to be a part of right now, which is just fantastic. So how to do that? Because if it's just a technique and I take my normal world and I insert techniques I learn into my world, it's just going to maintain a first tier thing. And I don't mean to say first tier as if that's bad. First tier has all kinds of amazing things. Healthy beige, healthy purple, healthy orange, healthy blue, healthy green. There's like, I mean, that is the body that is this integrated wholeness. Like that is actually what this cognition and all those parts coming together create this yellow, teal, integral, maturing integral, turquoise, lived, fresh, conscious experience. It is all that first tier stuff. So how do I lovingly embrace all these worlds that are these parts of me and you and reality? And how can I edge into or open into or long into or kind of like ache into or relax into even more reality, of including even more, to how to have that integral impulse be alive, how to have bodhicitta be like really sizzling as a lived experience now, when it's right now for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And then these great beings who in Buddhism are said to be awakened and enlightened, which I totally believe they've done that. There's many beings who've done that. They're just like a living field of bodhicitta all the time. What would it be to be like that? To not just have a stable turquoise where you're just like optimal, like anyone who's around you just like feels nourished and uplifted. Like the plumber, the angry person, the person you're walking by in the parking lot, the ants, the little birds that fly by, they come through your field and all of a sudden everything's like, oh, I can relax. Like, I don't have to be scared here. There's like, I'm in some kind of a space where like, I feel love. Like, I feel like I can be me. Ah, easy, so much easier. And then the naturalness of one's heart and mind just like relaxes. And what it does amazingly is it auto-poetically, its own intelligence expands, its own heart opens, its own mind brightens, its own connections deepen and get richer. It integrates further. It's the natural impulse. So how to be a field, meaning multiple worlds, internested worlds, which we already are, but how to consciously do that more and more carefully, full of care, with greater attunement to the other worlds that we're around, like people and pets and little microbes, and on and on and on. All these kind of beings we share this space with, whether we know it or not. So many beings are constantly, even in the very room we're in, of all kinds. And even modern science would say that. So many different kinds of beings in there. And so that's the second point is, this bodhicitta is not just a worldview, it's a living world. And each world is multiple worlds. And that's just straight up Wilbur stuff. Internested world systems, all the way down and all the way up, groundless. As wide as you can go, as deep and nuanced as you can go. There's more reality there to find. And how to love it and how to get that flexible. So that's kind of this question we'll explore soon in our first breakout. Like how? How have people found ways to do that? And how have you found ways to help show up for other people so that they do that? So that's for integralists who want to like keep opening, keep integrating. I think that is a very pressing, urgent question. Like, how do I live this more? Like, really? Like on the ground in my life, in my heart, in my body. Like, how can I do it? Because talk is easy. Then we get sick. Then an accident happens. Then we have a bad day. Then all this look in the world in the news and all this stuff. It's the time to like have this living integrative impulse. The future human is right now, right? Like the world is just asking for people to become living bodhisattvas, courageous beings that want to care for all beings. I mean, it's begging for it. And we can be that. Our nature is that way when it allows itself to be that way. And when it's supported to be that way, to have that freedom, to have that bravery, to have that clarity. And that takes different conditions for different people.
Dragpa?
Yeah.
I find it easier to find some of that energy when I'm with other energetic people.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the field that becomes energized, ourselves, or both?
Oh, yeah. So that's the third point. Awesome, Tom. How to become a field of bodhicitta. A field. Worlds. How to become worlds of bodhicitta. Where it's not so much me engaging with another. It's a common shared field. It's their worlds overlapping with my worlds, creating these larger meta worlds, these larger fields, these generative attractors. What Daniel Schmachtenberger, they were looking for the third attractor, right? First attractors over hypercentralization. You get totalitarianism of various kinds. That's first tier standard stuff, eating the whole spiral for your lunch. You get the opposite, extreme toxic chaos, like anything goes, utter decentralization. Everyone has their creative flair. There's almost no coherency. The spiral can't integrate further. You get heapism, integral heapism. It's not integrated. It's just a bunch of stuff in a buffet that if you eat all at once, it makes you sick because there's no coherent web. There's no deeper structure. The third attractor is field of bodhicitta. How to be a field of bodhicitta. How to encourage it in others, and how to be it oneself, like this field. And I think this is where a helpful thing for me has been like attunement, attuning. And another way to talk about this, which is a funny way, because it's oftentimes a way that's like not very, I don't know, it's not like so mainstream PC encouraged now. How to surrender. How to be with a world on the world's terms. With discernment, with intelligence, like you can distinguish toxic world from like healthier world. Like it requires the wisdom component. But how to actually become vulnerable to be influenced. To like have a soft spot where you actually can be changed. To let that vulnerable spot, like that surrender or that lack of like a full first tier encasing of like, I got this covered, I know this, I'm in control. Like how to actually create conditions where there is this like speckle of mystery. They call it hormesis. Like it's an intentional like little stimulation or aggravation that actually turns on the adaptive autopoietic intelligence of a system. You give it a little bit of a charge, so the system has to creatively engage again. It's not just the same old, same old. So how to do that with the right amount, the Goldilocks zone. That's a very challenging question to get that amount right for oneself, for others, especially in intersubjective we space. That's a very delicate balance, which also comes to conduct, guidelines. To talk about it very generally in an easy way, every ecology follows patterns. Desert follows desert patterns. Forest follows forest patterns. Tennis follows tennis patterns. It's how worlds work. It's how every world works. A cell follows cellular patterns and a molecule follows molecule patterns. And that's not an oppressive thing. That's just how coherent integration functions. And so how do the patterns connect, right? That's the integrative, integral modeling question. It's the bodhicitta question. Like what's available now for optimal omni-win game B multi-uplift? That's the kind of thing. How can this world become a supercharged, more awesome, caring, loving world? And I think I've seen, practically speaking, in terms of with bodhicitta, the wish to free all beings from suffering, like every single being, it's countless. The amount of beings in an acre of soil is literally countless. I don't think we have the math that has numbers that high yet. But I mean, there's an actual bodhisattva vow, like the wish that I will do whatever it takes for as long as it takes, that until every single one of those beings is free from suffering and the cause of suffering, I will keep showing up to help. I will keep learning more to how to cue into that being better, more omni-win, more uplifting, so that they're free of suffering and they can realize their own goodness nature. Their own goodness nature can just autopoetically do what it does, not because of me, but because like it has a supportive, nourishing field that it just turns on more. That's such a big view. It's much bigger than just world-centric. All beings. And how do I do it? Like really, and I've seen that, I mean, how could we do it one by one? If there's infinite beings, and we're all infinitely complex and amazingly kind of mysterious, like how can we figure, I mean, I appreciate the approach that tries to figure out the mechanics of something, the more right quadrant kind of quantifiable approach. What amazing beauties and horrors, but what also beauties that's brought to our lives. And you don't have to know exactly how a forest works in order to be in it and just be with it and enjoy it and be nourished by it and give back to it. You don't have to know the mechanics of how the car runs to use the car and like actually have it help you, you know. Some mechanics you need to know, and especially if you're tuning into someone else's ecology and they have a different kind of world making process And sometimes you really, how is this layering happening here? Because it's unfamiliar to me. It's a strange land for me. So like that can really help. It can't just be intuitively felt through often for most of us. So mechanics have a place. But like to be a field, like how could, if any being comes into your field, that being is going to have its own heart mind turn on brighter. Or just, you could say, relax into its naturalness deeper, integrate further. I don't see there's only, I mean, how else to do it to actually help beings on such a vast scale? And I see a hand raised, but to actually help beings on such a vast scale, it just can't be a one-by-one thing. It definitely includes one-by-one, and it has to do something that's a little bit larger to like larger fields of kind of inclusion as well. There's got to be a way we do that, and I just kind of generally refer to that as attunement. Is it cool if we go to Lynn's question? Great.
Yes.
Hey, Lynn, yeah, please jump in.
Unmute. There
Hi,
we go.
thank you so much. This is beautiful. I'd like to raise a question that I've had to deal with recently. For those of us that are empaths, have very strong empathic qualities, right? That's, I guess, most of us here. What I've discovered is that I have used it as a defense against feeling my own pain and healing myself. So I come across somebody who's rejecting me or throwing barbs at me. And my first feeling as an empath is, what is his pain? How can I hold it? I'm not dealing with how am I feeling in my embodiment of being attacked. So I've been using it, I now see that I've been using it as an excuse not to self-heal. And I raised this question within integral circles for a long time because it's all about how we approach the other and help to heal the other. But so often we're not healing ourselves. What's your answer or response?
My first response is, what have you found to be helpful?
Understanding that I use it as a defense so that I don't have to deal with my own pain. I mean, this is very new. It just came up about a week ago that I realized that I was using it as a defense. So that's, I'm in a questioning mode, having just recognized this.
Yeah. Compassion fatigue and also burnout of various kinds.
Yep.
You know, to like love the world so much and to care for it so much and to see, I mean, in so many ways to have highlighted now the ways that it's hurting, breaking, bleeding, burning. I mean, just like what heartache is that? It's just very like just devastating. In Buddha, I mean, not to always bring it back to Buddhism, but Buddha, like that's the first teaching Buddha gave. The first noble truth of suffering. Their conditioned existence is suffering. Holding on to things in a way that kind of like, basically like it holds them and like expects them to stay put. That causes this suffering. Which is only to say, what a genuine question. How to be with this suffering, my suffering, others' suffering, how to really be with it in a way that actually, in terms of Buddhism, is a path to freedom from suffering. Is there a way to end suffering finally? If there is, what are the steps? Like the actual practical steps. And one thing that I found that is deeply helpful, and it seems oftentimes overlooked or bypassed into and looked into way too much, is seeing the kind of like the absolute or the openness aspect of the experience of the suffering. One suffering, others suffering. That I find oftentimes with compassion fatigue, and myself too. I'm just actually taking the experience way too seriously. I'm investing too much into the experience as if this is the only way it's ever gonna be. like my reactive kind of mode of various ways, like it locks in and seizes up. And in that seizing, in that locking, in that fixating, which is actually can be a very natural, like very intelligent response in certain circumstances, the aperture of what I'm sensitive to and with is like this. And then the absolute openness kind of things are more like, okay, wait, there's also more, like bring a little more air in the room, bring a little more blood through the body, find ways to like actually ease back into the kind of more open dimensionality of the experience, not just the suffering conditioned part of things moving dynamically, but like the actual fact that because they're moving dynamically, because there is interdependence, that means there's no fixed, static, essential, stuck part there. So like whatever helps kind of ease into or remember or kind of like care for that aspect, I would say at least that side also has to be cared for.
Yeah. Thank you.
And that's a general response. There's a lot of detail there, and it would really depend also on like more of the specifics of kind of where you're coming from. So I'm kind of playing it more on the, yeah, that way.
Thank you.
Dragpa, do you want to take another question or go to the breakouts now?
How about one more question and then we'll do the
Okay.
breakouts and come back.
Okay, Ishan.
Hello, Dragpa. Nice to see this conversation. Amazing. And I have the question regarding this field specifically, the field you are talking about, and the field that is the state of being, and how the state of being also impacts others, and not only impact it, also elevates others to the same state of being that you are in.
Okay.
And this state of being, it seems very much idealistic. Because it not only involves the state of being, but also like the structure of consciousness. Because to
Yes.
achieve that state of being, there is not only that level of consciousness that you have achieved, but also that level of moral intelligence that you need to achieve, and also a level of expanded consciousness and spiritual understandings of the interconnectedness of all reality that you need to achieve.
Okay.
And that is all very high altitude of development, I see.
Gotcha.
And it's like just becoming like Buddha or something.
But every further integration is that happening. We don't have to hold it as if the full opening, the full inclusion, full enlightenment, full kind of reciprocal attuning, that it's either that or nothing. Like every time we like love more deeply, or like listen more carefully, or like or forgive ourselves more like genuinely, or give ourselves the space to actually do the regenerative care. Like my wife is a acupuncturist, Chinese herbal medicine doctor, and yin and yang. Like yang is like, it's all yang time now. Do, perform, produce, consume. What about the yin? What about the being part? Like anytime we actually nourish the being component as the foundation or the ground of the doing, becoming component, that is the awakened impulse. Enlightened beings just always do that all the time, seamlessly, elegantly, with like all the different situations and conditions they're in. But anytime we do that even a little bit more, it's that same enlightened, awakened bodhicitta impulse. It's the same thing.
So there is two components that I am seeing here. First is the state of being, and other is like kind of being the Buddha. So it's like I don't need to be the Buddha to experience the state of being, I see.
Well, yeah, cool. So in the moment when you're actually integrating further or like having bodhicitta beyond, that is awakened mind, heart, awakened heart, mind. And then the moment it shuts off, turns down, dims out, locks up, then it's not that. Then usually it's back into a first tier kind of mode where like I'm first and everything else is second. I'm more important and everyone else comes next, instead of we're both important. And so it's how to maintain. It's totally a discipline.
It's a discipline. Yeah,
it's a path. And so it's a path depending on what helps each heart and each mind do that, which is why it's not just an idea or a frame or a worldview. It's actually a world. And because every world has these patterns and rules, these systems that it follows, that means within that world, there are paths to greater attunement and enfoldment. We just have to identify what world am I, what worlds am I with, and so what are the kind of paths that I want to care for to have this opening and flourishing, attuning, this bodhicitta actually brighten and sustain longer. So then that goes to the question for the breakout group. And I have them written out here. I'm going to pop them into the chat real quick. Great, sorry. And so what helps you get into a turquoise flow? In Buddhism, I didn't refer to this yet, but the middle way, they call it the middle way. Neither holding too tight, locking up, or too loose and just floppy, like the middle way. Or living the awakened heart mind. What actually helps you do that? What have you found in your experience helps you like be turquoise now? And same time, what can you do or be to support others to be in the turquoise flow too? So the breakout question, which I think is about 15 minutes, groups of I think about 4, is what have you found in your personal experience? What have been helpful things to help you get into the turquoise flow, that way of being, to have bodhicitta be on and to stay on? Like, what have you found helpful? And then in addition or in extension, as that field, what have you found are ways that really actively support and nourish others to do that from what you've kind of seen in your living experience? Does that seem clear enough for a breakout room topic?
Thumbs up.
Yep.
Okay, we're ready to go there. I've got a new version of Zoom, so hopefully this all goes well. Here we go. See you in your breakout room.
Breakout sessions are not recorded.
So, thanks so much. Welcome back, friends. Anybody want to share something that came up during a breakout room? Feel free. I know, Sean, you spoke before. I'm going to pause real quick and see if there's anyone who hasn't spoken before, just in case.
Well, Paul, I'd love to just share what a beautiful experience that we had from my perspective, and I think others would agree, in our little breakout room. The different shares that we had, there were 4 of us, were so complimentary. I'm choked up and I have tears. Just there was the Dharma talk that you launched us all into just continued, right? Like kind of an unbroken stream right into that space. And really just like that was the quartet of instrumentation that just, kept that song going. And yeah, really grateful for that experience. So thank you for leading us all there. And thank you to my other musicians. It was really lovely to show up.
Okay, thank you. Larry, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, we had a fair amount of questioning going on as to some of your concepts and how you're relating them. And like turquoise, to work with the models, I look at turquoise as a stage, not a state. So to just, and stages can take years to develop through. So to just open into the turquoise way, and I do accept that all stages are available to us, but if we're functioning in first tier, the second tier and third tier stages in particular, we don't have the mental constructs to really understand what we're experiencing or knowing if we're into a turquoise or an indigo or higher stage, if we're just like breaking into it temporarily as a state experience. So that was a little cumbersome in terms of trying to sort that out. And that's not good or bad, it just how it's playing out for us. And a question that I had was, I'm curious that you're positioning bodhicitta as a turquoise stage. And I'm not saying you're right or wrong, just a question I have, as opposed to maybe an integral coral or an indigo coral stage, or even further out. And this gets back to the play on state versus stage. And there are many ways to experience, this came up in our group, there are many ways to experience these different things. And part of our challenge is getting on the same page in terms of terminology, you know, what the definitions are. So the referent that we're trying to identify, the meaning, is dependent upon our understanding of each other's definitions.
Mm-hmm.
And to go on a little bit further, suffering. Yeah, I used to be all about getting out of suffering, beyond suffering. I got to a place in my own development that I see a functional thing about suffering, and to just pull somebody out of it, or to try to create an experience where they step out of it, and especially stay out of it, isn't necessarily supportive of their growth, development, evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And I can think of my own self. I mean, suffering is something I haven't experienced for a really long time, decades, well, a couple decades anyhow. Pain, yeah. Confusion, sure. Upset, yeah. But suffering, even with a health condition, I don't experience it as suffering. It just is what it is, and make the best of it and go on with life. But suffering, part of my compassion is not trying to pull somebody out of their suffering. Depending on what it is, it's sort of a moment-to-moment thing, situational. What I sense is going on with them, and what's going to serve them, obviously from my perspective, since that's where I'm coming from. So just automatically, bodhicitta meaning help people, relieve people of their suffering. I think what's more valuable is, what will they learn by being in it? What will they learn by being pulled out of it? How will it sustain them, enrich them by being in it, or moving through it to come out of it? It's not a black and white issue for me that, oh, get rid of all suffering. I don't agree with the Buddha on that. And there's also the symptom of suffering versus the cause of the suffering. Because if you remove the symptom, they still have the cause going on. Anyhow.
So much richness there. Stage versus state, suffering, the functionality of suffering, the actual, that's kind of part of how this whole thing is. You can actually, by trying to do something with someone's suffering, it can actually be harmful. Missed kind of opportunities, or missed kind of tenderness kind of thing. I mean, there's a lot of richness there. Bodhicitta being equated as a turquoise or not, or kind of, wouldn't it be a higher tier, third tier, something? Those are a lot of threads there. Thank you, Larry. A lot of richness. So instead of trying to answer it all, one of the things that I've found in my, small little explorations of integral and Tibetan Buddhism, I'm a very much beginner at both. Like, these are just vast fields of interdependence, of amazing features. It's just very humbling. But one of the things I found is, we've now reached a point of a certain kind of a saturation of complexity, of perspectives, of information, of content, that I've found that having what I've called, and it's just other people have too, a heuristic or a meta heuristic, a really handy rule of thumb to elegantly hold a lot of complexity in a simple way. So simplicity within complexity. And I found bodhicitta is one of those meta heuristics, is a holding pattern or a holding zone that it can be unfurled in just a tremendously vast amount of ways, which is the whole 9 jhana vehicle systems of Tibetan Buddhism. You can just keep unlayering bodhicitta. It really is the full teaching of the Buddha. So, but as a handy way to kind of generously locate certain conversations in a way that's generous, meaning there's kind of some wiggle room for people to kind of then really weave in their specific definitions and lived experience. I don't know, I've found that it's really helpful in that way. And then once we kind of have a generous, we're on the same approximate ballpark world system page, then we can get more into the weeds of really kind of trying to like crystallize or kind of bring some bright structure to like what exactly are the perspectives that are kind of in play here. But if we get too much into the weeds too fast, I find that most of us, or a lot of people I know, are already kind of drowning in the weeds. And to come up with 8 more points or like 4 more kind of like open, rich layers, some people that is like deeply satisfying for them. And I just wrote a gigantic, way too fat book that's like way too many pages, that's almost unreadable. The size is so big. But if you can zoom into like 4 of the pages, I tried to create it so that they're like independent little kind of like slots that you can actually just appreciate this flower in the garden. You don't need to have the whole garden. You don't need to have the whole ecology. And I don't know, I've found that's one of the talents that Ken Wilber brings. Stages, states, types, lines, shadow, quadrants. How elegant are those meta-heuristics? The amount of complexity that the all-qual meta-theoretical thing, the amount of simplicity this held, like so elegantly holds this rich complexity. I think that's like one of the amazing features of Wilber. But he doesn't just say, then just leave it at stage, stages, type. He's like, okay, let's really define what's the difference between state and stage. Is there a stage structure, a vantage point? And you can get into the weeds. But for a lot of people, once you're just talking about third tier, choral, state, entry, pivot, phase shift, a lot of people all of a sudden end of interest. And so that again for me is like really feeling out, or kind of as you mentioned, Larry, like to really kind of try to, when is this helpful to be in the weeds, in the trees, and when is it better to zoom out? And so to zoom in and zoom out and kind of have this reciprocal functionality is I often find very helpful. But to your points, they're astute points, and they're like worthy of a lot of more exploration, which a lot of people are doing. So I appreciate that. Do we want to go to Jesse?
Yes, I just wanted to say, our group was fantastically wonderful. And one of the things that really fed me and nurtured me in it is the way we were in a we space, and the way that we could effortlessly come in and out of each other. And there wasn't such a strong I. And when I noticed in our little group, when that dissolves, there's such a kind of, you're not being compassionate, you're not being, all that stuff's happening. Like compassion's happening, connections happening, intimacy's happening, and curiosity is strongly happening. And when we were being with each other like that, I get fed. And then when we're all getting fed, the feeding gets bigger and bigger. It feeds itself. It's not like we were doing anything or trying to, how to, or what are the steps to. And we could interrupt each other or come in and out of each other, but it's more like the holding of the space itself is what matters much more than the content. So I wanted to put that in.
Yay, lovely. It's so great. And then as the relationships deepen and the understanding and the trust kind of, thickens and gets kind of more stabilized, or more, people are cared for a little more thoroughly as like more complex wild beings that we are, then there's a lot more opportunity to actually really zoom into those things, the tense spots, or the kind of really weird, strange stuff, or the boring stuff, or just all that kind of rich nuance that is a life, that is a person, that is a relationship. So that's beautiful that was happening in
One
your
other little point in there is humility. Humility was happening effortlessly. And as more and more humility happened, other things happened. Like humility opens these doors. And so I'm agreeing, but so humility means we could make mistakes. We could just be stupid humans together. It was,
Yay, let's be amazing, stupid humans together. Thanks, Jess. How about Cass?
Hi, yeah, I would just like to hear from either you or others on the questions, like answering the questions. Like Kabir had said, "Oh, we had this wonderful group," but what did you say in the group? Um, yeah, because I'm really interested in, how do we expand ourselves and others into turquoise? Thank you.
Anybody want to pop in with a share right off the bat with that? I know maybe it's good. Ishan, do you want to jump in on that? Or no, sorry, pause. Who said that? Go for it.
Yeah. I think I
Karen.
can do this real fast. This is just boiling down what we did in the group. I was in the group with Jesse, and it was like, when I'm having a senior moment, it was like I'm boiling down a lot of beautiful, heartfelt things into just really being present with the other person to create that. We're calling it turquoise for convenience, to create that field where you are really present with the other person, balanced by taking care of ourselves, having the discernment to see where I'm at my limit. That's where the humility comes from. I'm a limited being, and where I need to withdraw and take care of my energy and apply self-care. So that's how I would boil down what we were saying. I don't know if the other ladies would see it, but that's it for me.
Any more things people have found helpful to kind of activate at least a more wise and compassionate mode for themselves, if not a bodhicitta or a turquoise? Or anyone else have some helpful things they found?
Well,
You want to
Karen's comment, I would say it's just really coming back to presence, being with, not for the person or against the person, just being with the person and holding that person in that space and just being with them.
Ishan, you've had your hand up. Sorry to pause you. You go for it if you want.
Yep, no issues. I would like to post some spiritual intelligence-based communities. So that I was like focused on pure spiritual intelligence. So like those interested can have, exposure of them. So I'm like posting that in the chat. So like you can have a look. So we like quite a lot of communities that are based on the law of one. And you can free to explore that. And I would like to present my views on this spiritual exploration that we are having based on the ongoing discussion that we just had. And my personal perspective on spirituality is not religiosity. So it is like, not to study those religious principles to be confined into a box, but to see those principles as a framework that can help you escape the box that you are in. Not to confine yourself in the box, but to escape the box that you are in. So it's like, just like, you can use the frameworks that are in, because every principle, every religious tradition has something, has some truth to it. And, understanding those frameworks can literally, help you transcend that, limitations that you experience in this current reality. And every religion on this planet have something, like literally mystical to it. And using those frameworks, using those tools to experience that personal spirituality, because spirituality is unique to every individual, because it is the relationship of yourself with the one who created you and the whole reality. It is unique to everyone. And those religious systems and frameworks are tools that we can use to explore. And I don't like feel myself confining to a single set of spiritual beliefs. So just my perspective. Thank you.
I feel a little bit called out by Koss for being a little obtuse. And not that I had intended that, but I want to offer just, and maybe my jazz musicians will tell me if I get this wrong. But in response to your question, Cass, what I saw as examples in the room of how we do this is one person really showed us a humility. Just that innocent willingness to be in beginner's mind, to be open and to just receive and to be present and to ask for help and support to make that connection, that sublimation. I thought that was a really great example, and that resonates with me as a way that I try to practice this. And another member of our group demonstrated a really just a diligence and a discipline of coming back to the intention again and again, to noticing, that humility, but also this aspiration for bodhicitta, this aspiration for inclusion and for care and for showing up in that way. And so I thought that was another really honest and simple and clear example of how to do this that resonates with me. And another one in our group recognized this quality of we doing this together. This is, to speak a little to the Buddhism, like there's a Sangha element of this, that this is, none of us is in this alone, and that this practicing of enacting a turquoise world space is about meeting one another where we are. And that felt honest and true to me as well. And then also that it was just this quality of like, just remembering that there's nowhere to go, that we're already there. That this bodhicitta is, as you've said, Dragpa, it's such a profound teaching. There's nowhere you can look. And if you look carefully enough, you'll find it there. And so that I hope, Cass, that gives you kind of a couple of practical examples, and that feels like a better answer than what I said before.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sweet. I want to I want to put a 5-minute I'll just open something up that'll kind of like to some degree like open the doors widely, and then possibly have a little short either kind of response time, or if not, a short breakout group. And the widely thing is in terms of like Tibetan Buddhist context, like always in Tibetan Buddhism, we have at the core this bodhicitta, heart, mind of enlightenment, this wisdom and compassion. It's the core of it all. Love, compassion, wisdom. And in addition, what Tibetan Buddhism, or Vajrayana, the indestructible vehicle, what it does is it has that core, and it says when you really are with that, and its relative and absolute aspects, and its openness, its freedom, and its fullness, its richness, its interwoven, interconnecting interdependence of all scales and like quadrants and levels and lines and types and a whole thing. Like as you at least pause and entertain that possibility that maybe it is possible to be such like a vastly loving, caring, intelligent, brilliant being that's like really has the knowledge, has the wisdom, has the care, has the ability to really serve beings vastly. Then in addition to bodhicitta, what we get is it's called the path of skillful means. Of all these skillful ways to actually activate that bodhicitta, to display that bodhicitta, to embody that bodhicitta. And that's like the definitive feature of Vajrayana. In addition to bodhicitta, which are often called Sutra Mahayana, or the great vehicle, in addition with that heart of bodhicitta, it like basically takes these certain skillful means of working with body, speech, and mind to like really open widely and deeply that bodhicitta, way beyond kind of what I don't know, way beyond kind of our normal sense making, I'm just me, this is just how reality is kind of framing system. And so to be specific about what that means is in Tibetan Buddhism, there's two things in terms of having bodhicitta be in a world and having that world like learn to better attune with itself and other worlds that it's in. There's these two basic practices, and one's called creation stage meditation, and the other is called completion stage meditation. And to the way that we're kind of like entertaining or exploring this topic today, creation stage meditation is literally you're like enacting being in a world that you are creating whose very fabric is bodhicitta. And all the beings in it are bodhicitta, like full on 100% bodhicitta now in its vivid, vibrant realness. And you're basically creating according to like whatever the lineage instructions are. You're like letting your mind and your heart open vastly and be in this what's called pure relative truth, or this pure expression of bodhicitta, when it's fully on, when all the beings are fully on, that's called like enlightened beings. When everything they say and do is fully bodhicitta, that's called mantra. When everything every movement of mind or awareness is an expression of love, compassion, and wisdom, that's called dharmakaya, or it's called this enlightened awareness. So literally there's the whole practices. It's like creation practices where you're literally training yourself to boldly be the fullness of your bodhicitta now in all of these distinct dazzling ways. I'm going to be as a blue being, as a being with 4 arms, as an entire field of beings, and the world has all these features, and you're basically training your bodhicitta to flexibly engage and attune in this variety of ways, all according to bodhicitta, heart, mind of enlightenment. And then in addition to that, what you do, the completion stages, this is a way bodhicitta can express. A world can be born this way, and everything born passes and dissolves eventually, and then you dissolve the world. And where did the world come from? The emptiness or the openness aspect of bodhicitta, this freedom component of bodhicitta. From this freedom, bodhicitta displays as this loving, inclusive, limitless, boundless, boundless compassion. And then it has these dazzling features, which are a world with beings in the world, doing activities in that world. And then after that world of enlightened activity kind of does its kind of thing that enlightened activity does, it then dissolves back to where it came from, which is this more openness or emptiness, absolute aspect of bodhicitta. So you have this like pulsing from openness or formless, comes semi-form into form, dissolves from form into semi-form into formless. And so it's this constant breathing or birthing, living, dying, rebirthing, living, dying. And then there's whole systems of practice that do that in terms of the path of skillful means in Vajrayana. And so the question that I have with that, just as those are very general, very, very general ways of talking about 2 kind of systems of Tibetan Buddhist practice: creation stage practice, completion stage practice, creating a world and being in it that's enlightened and bodhicittaful, dissolving that world, and then recreating in another version of bodhicitta display, and training one's mind to be comfortable with that and able to do that. The question I have for the group is, and I just said a lot, so sorry. I'll take a breath. The question I have for the group is, how does it change integral, Wilberian integral? How does it, to actually hold lightly as a hypothetical what if? What if there are beings that can do this? What if there are beings that are like have bodhicitta on all the time? They're enlightened beings. What if they're like so flexible that they're literally like can create and dissolve worlds like of compassionate outreaching display that are totally fine-tuned to the beings that are around like us? What if there actually are such beings that are doing that? How would it change Wilberian integral if we entertain that kind of a possibility? I found in a lot of my experience that talk about things like that, like dakas and dakinis and living bodhisattvas and enlightened beings among us and being able to change into different forms and do these different expressions, a lot of that's put in the pre-modern bucket. Oh, that's the superstitious fairy tale Saturday morning cartoon bucket. But what if, and this is the question, what if some of that isn't in the pre-modern superstitious, just straight up imaginative like projection? What if it's actually imaginal? What if it's actually like the interweaving bardo flexibility of life, interdependence, and there are beings that can flow and flex with that in ways, in scopes and scales and textures that like just don't show up on our radar yet? For me, at least, as a very mundane sentient being. So that's like that's a general question I have for integral community at large, and of course then people here too. What would it actually do to the integral meta modeling to just entertain that possibility not just to casually dismiss it, but to be like, what if we're not at the leading edge of evolution and there's some beings that are way beyond where we're at, and maybe they're here and maybe they're helping. So I'm not sure. That's maybe we'll go right into question mode, because breakout groups, I think, are the time short. Hey, do you want to, Phyllis? Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dragpa. This has just been fantastic. And I feel humbled to even think that I can speak here and with everybody. So please forgive my rudimentary stuff here.
You're awesome, Phyllis. Go, you know what's what. Go for it.
Yesterday, I told Namali that I think I'm addicted to like involution and evolution, and the whole idea of co-creation, and that for a long time I thought that involution was something that was already laid down, and that Eros was driving back up. So the agape was from the one to the many, and the Eros was the drive, and that those grooves were written. And then in reading Wilbur, I got the idea, no, it's not that those grooves were laid down and that's like fate. There's nothing about fate in it. It's a co-creation, and that everything that we do and say and are in every moment of our life is co-creating the next moment of our life and giving us something to emerge into. And so so involution, it can be right there in front of us from what we've just been, from the way that we've just lived. That can be the cosmic groove of the next moment. And so when I think of it that way, it doesn't sound that different from what you're saying. And it sounds like for some reason, so far anyway, it doesn't really change the Wilberian map for me, because the map somehow seems to be expansive enough and give ways of working with it enough so that idea that you just brought, which is just like so exquisite, can somehow in my mind relate to something that I'm just learning more deeply and integral.
Ooh, I'll say a 1-minute story and then we'll go on to Mary. I was somewhat recently at a teaching in Mexico, and this great Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhist master was reading through the works of Longchenpa and 7 volumes of it. And so he would kind of share, this is Oksar Khensa Rinpoche, he would share kind of things that he pulled out of the text. And one of the things that he just read, like day, I don't know, 8 or so of the gathering, big group, he said, I just read this part where Longchenpa is talking about there's a world in the universe that only lasts for the duration of a spark shooting out of a fire. That entire world. And the only beings that are in that world are 8th level bodhisattvas. They're the only ones that are in that world. And for those bodhisattvas, those just amazingly accomplished heart, mind, open beings, for them, it feels like eons of time. They have the time dilation of what's small, what's big, what's a dense groove and cosmic groove, what's the same thing seen as a very light groove, what's a moment of mind actually could be universes of mind. That like flex flow of reality, as we really start to train in perspective taking, where we get, okay, if I'm going to play in this game, in this world, it works like this. And then I'll zoom out and do this world and it can zoom like that. That I think is just a function that's being called for now in the 21st century of cross-pollination of everything, to see that as an opportunity to be like, oh, involution can be these deep pattern grooves, but it also can be these micro grooves. And how to do that in a way that's not just, doesn't just sound nice, but actually has a depth of clarity and precision and thoroughness and actionability. Means like you can actually live it, and that's where it becomes a training. Like we actually have to train to become that attuned, that flexible, and like have real kind of ways that our hearts and our minds can open and deepen and ground that bring about those kind of abilities or that kind of wonderment. Even as a what if, even if we don't want to go there and think that kind of thing is possible, to just entertain, well, what if like we could be that flexible, like that attuned, that holonic, that integrated. Mary.
Well, what I'm thinking is fitting into what you're just saying now, because I'm thinking, well, yeah, I believe that there are the enlightened people that can come in and out, and it doesn't. I guess I'm acting as if, because I might not be able to describe it in detail, but like you gave the little example of I'm looking for this. And it's like you got something way, like you got your microscope on and you can't see anything because it's like this. And then when you show the aperture opening and then being more receiving of more that maybe you can't, you're not ready to zoom in on it yet. So I thought, well, yeah, of course, all those things are going on, and just breathing into it and being okay with it and not putting the pressure on that you can't describe it all. They're showing themselves.
Oh, lovely. Really, I'm gonna pause here and check in with Eloy. Is there anything we need to do? I know we have about 10 minutes to the initial conclusion into social time for anyone who wants to stay. Is there anything you won't need to do with this time now, Eloy?
We got about 7 or 8 more minutes, 7 more minutes, and I think Jerry will take it from there. So you can keep going.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. As a pause, I hope this has been helpful, nourishing. It's a very live inquiry for me. I'm deeply humbled by the more I share with others, and with others, learn from others, try to actually pay attention to what's going on inside of me. It's what a vast, amazing thing we're a part of, that we are. And I'm just in this short, very brief fire speck time together that has infinite density. I hope some of these points, I'm just literally cracking the tiny little doorway into these vast worlds, these vast terrains of exploration. Integral meta theory, Tibetan Buddhism, which includes all these interlayered entire philosophical systems and views and paths and conduct sets. It's so rich. The ecologies, the internested ecologies are so rich. So just to say that at the beginning of the end, this is just a tiny little taste. I in no way am trying to make this some exhaustive thing. But I am trying to honor these lineage systems that I've received, that I'm just a student of, that I'm very deeply appreciative of, very humbled by, and actively trying to learn more from. Very actively, doing my best. And so those are some caveats that I hope this is a somewhat of a warm invitation, just to kind of, I don't know. What is this turquoise? Is it a stage or a structure? If we go to these conferences and as we kind of engage more of the kind of intensity of 21st century information age, AI soon to do the thing it is. How can turquoise, how can I integrate further? How can I have a deeper, richer, more loving orange? A more loving blue? How can I honor all these parts of me a little more thoroughly? And that's a very real question that's a very active for me, and not just at the head, but certainly at the heart. And then that really it lends itself naturally to be like, how can I be with others in ways that like honor them more? They really care about them more on their terms, according to how they make sense, the music they like to listen to. And so as like a little bit of a somewhat, I don't know, poetic summary. But then maybe if Karen, we still have a few minutes. Do you want to share something, Karen?
Oh, thank you. Dragpa, I am so delighted to see you here. This has been even more wonderful than I knew it was going to be. But I want to speak to the specific question you asked about. I'm translating into terms of my lineage, and I echo your passion for taking these existing lineages and seeing how they align with each other, with integral, with science, with what we know about psychology. And I am with you in your question. I mean, in my lineage, I live in a world that's populated by these non-physical energy beings, deities. Every lineages have different names for them. They're real to me. And I use the dimensions of string theory. If there are 4 dimensions, if there are 5 dimensions, there's room for all of this. And I will stick my neck out a little bit and say, when I was working in my guru's organization, helping create a corporate structure for him, I actually served on a board of trustees with somebody who had a fairly major city, a paranormal power. If he wanted to put his agenda through, he could hypnotize all of us and put us to sleep and get us to vote in favor of his thing. And then we'd kind of come out and wait. We'd be 5 minutes on. Damn, he did it again. And it didn't work for him for very long because we succeeded in organizing around him, and he was out within 6 months. It was an interesting 6 months. And my friend Lynn, who's also here, she knew me through that phase. This stuff is real to me. And so to your point, the question is, what about integral theory? This is one of my senses of Ken Wilber's Ockwall meta system, is that it allows a space for this. Ken Wilber shies away from it. He kind of touches around the edges. He does talk about subtle bodies, and we expressed. Several of us here are in Nomali Pereira's reading group. We're reading The Religion of Tomorrow by Ken Wilber, that massive tome, and it was just expressed last Thursday that we are dissatisfied. A number of us are not happy with the way he presented subtle and causal. And my sense is, if we grappled directly with these issues in Ken Wilber's meta theory, I think we could make Ken Wilber's treatment of the subtle and causal energies far more lucid than they are presented now. So I think it's a piece that the theory allows for, but doesn't do a very good job of including as yet. But it's a work in progress. So that's what this is. As you can tell, this is a question that I've been grappling with too. So I'm throwing that into the pot. Thank you very much for this evening.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Karen. And it's also why kind of, for me, why emphasizing bodhicitta, or this wisdom and compassion, is 100% the more actionable, more ready step, which, even talking about it very generally in very approximate terms, there's so much nutrition that it offers to kind of pick a community, but the integral one too, and for my own mind, for my own study, for my own practice. And so it can be a very general field that then can get really detailed with very specific features of very specific practices and beings and systems. And it's just, if we zoom in too fast, especially when we're talking about trans-methodological things or integral methodological pluralism, once we zoom in and get into trans lineage, what are the deep structure universal features, these involutionary givens, and what are the more variable features? That conversation requires a lot of trust and a lot of kind of willingness, and I would say very much as the ground, a lot of humility.
I would love to see that I would love to see that conversation start among the different lineages, but we would have to have a very clear set of guidelines so we don't all start arguing with each other.
And at the very least, we need to get more compassionate and wise, or bodhicitta full, or turquoise full, or at least into tier, to have that be any kind of a real possibility. And so that's kind of where regardless, that's always going to be helpful and nutritive. Like that bedrock reweaving is all, anything higher up in the stack or the whatever you, however you want to kind of model it. That layer, that deep core bedrock of bodhicitta, wisdom, compassion, love, is like has to be there as a living, breathing feature of the world. In my view, and as I always said, in my view. 2 minutes left, I think, before we're doing the kind of wrap up part. Ishan, you got, or who? Yeah, please. Yeah, go.
This is
Yeah.
Jerry. Yeah, I think at this point, what I'd like to do is just kind of conclude the formal part of the meeting. And so, you know, first of all, like, just say thank you so much, Dragpa. That's just been, you know, wonderful. Just fit perfectly, I think, with the group that we have here. You know, these are the kind of questions and perspectives, and you know, I think for me, you've kind of expanded the way in which we can look at our integral theory and our lives and our practices, and really put a lot of energy and life into the exploration. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here. And is there any way that we can keep in touch with you as far as, like, do you have a website or anything that we can follow your work or your writings or anything? Anything you'd like to maybe toss in the chat that we're...
Not really. I don't have a website. I live at a place, Padmasambhava Buddhist Center. It's in Padmasambhi, upstate New York. So that's something you could, that's like lineage things. I mean, Facebook, I'm on Facebook, but it's like face crack, face, whatever devastating thing it is, with some goodness there. So Pema Dragpa. But for the most part, I don't really have an active something. There's Medium. There's, I mean, if you look up Dragpa, YouTube, there's some stuff around. But yeah, no, not so much.
Great. Well, it's great. I'm so glad that we could have you here then and get some exposure to your, you know, your work and your practice. So thank you so much. And at this point, we want to, you know, conclude the formal part of the meeting. So if some of you have to drop off at this point, thanks so much for being here. We hope to see you next month. And so we'll just move on at this point. And folks, it seems like the discussion's going pretty well. If you want to use the raise your hand function, it's a great way to continue the discussion as people kind of go in order. And if it's not very busy, just and nobody's speaking, just go ahead and unmute and speak. So we can continue, I guess. Let's see. I know, Eloy, would you have something you wanted to go? I know, Ishan, you've spoken a few times, so we're going to take a few people. But go ahead, Eloy.
Yeah, I was noticing the level of enthusiastic energy that you bring, Dragpa. And one of the things I've noticed in not just Buddhist practice, but a lot of practices where there's a high degree of discipline, I don't know, required. It's not necessarily required, but and sometimes feels very heavy and serious. And I've always wondered, like, is there a Buddhist equivalent of like ecstatic dance or something like that? And I think that that this the way you brought the bodhicitta stuff and the bodhisattva stuff felt more ecstatic to me than boring and disciplined.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you probably know a little or a lot, Eloy, about Tibetan Buddhism. There's like all kinds of ways to enact Buddhist principles, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, like path of skillful means. It depends if you're around a community that has the kind of resources and also the specialization. There's torma making, there's dancing, there's arts, there's body mudras, there's whole yoga systems, there's energetic breathwork practices. There's art, you know, Tibetan, there's painting, there's literally building mandalas and the sand mandala kind of art. There's so many arts. But it kind of depends on one's own personal interest and where you want to go deep into it, as like what's a skillful means that activates your bodhicitta, and also, you know, we all, like, as participants in this mystery, as stewards or custodians of like reality in life, like, as we have this, how are we being held accountable? Like, what's the community space asking of us too? Not just like what will work for me here, but like there's also the reciprocal, how can I give back? And sometimes in a space that means I won't do the as boring thing as I would want, or as movement oriented thing I would want, and to try to have a give and take with that. But yeah, thanks so much for your just kindness with the words. I mean, like I don't know. It's a fine weave there, Eloy, with discipline being kind of by the book. It's like any learning curve. You really have to like put the time in of just doing, like, learning how the structure is before you can really innovate with much elegance, or allow like that agapic opening for like grace to flow through. There's peak moments. This great master, again, Dzogchen Khyentse Rinpoche, said, someone asked him about like Rigpa, or like being in the nature of mind spontaneously. Do you have to use a disciplined path? And he said, this great master, Nolsho Ken Rinpoche, Dzogchen master, he said it's possible to experience the nature of mind as if you go into a hotel room and you pull the curtains open to look outside. That's very possible. But it's not that practical as a way of life. Like, it's possible, the nature is the nature. Like, we do kind of come into it. But as a disciplined system, like, how can we actually like develop a facility to like keep coming into it almost irregardless of circumstance? And that requires some kind of a disciplined system. But if it gets too stuffy, too stodgy, too tight, too by the book, it loses its in-touchness with reality. And if it gets too loose, too ecstatic, too kind of only my way here, and I happen to start bumping into everyone when I dance and they're like falling down, then that has its downsides too. Ishan, I think you're gonna get to take a little tour of this temple I'm in for a minute, because I need to like plug my computer in. This is like social time. So maybe Phyllis, if you wanna, Phyllis first, and then we'll go to Ishan.
I'm always so happy in your presence, Dragpa, and I want to go back to your and that's over Zoom, you know. I mean, that's that energetic thing in this technology, and still that I just am truly happy. And the question that you asked earlier, I'm thinking about how bodhicitta and the enlivened love, compassion, and wisdom, what if there are those subtle energies and those things that we may not be able to see yet? If they are there, what a beautiful way to welcome them.
I often find turquoise more like setting a table really well for guests.
Nice. It's beautiful. Yeah.
What do you think, Ishan?
Oh, this talk about Buddhism really made me appreciate the depth and beauty that I had overlooked. I had never went too deep into this. I had gone into Advaita Vedanta, mystical Kabbalah, and subtle energy sciences, and chakra systems and all, but never into Buddhism. And I've heard about a hierarchical framework of kayas that you were talking, like Dharam-kaya, and I believe like there were stages to those. I don't remember them accurately, but I would love to get them into like deeply. I see like there is enormous context given the emotional weightage you are giving here, like you have experience too, I believe, and I would love to explore that. And
I haven't experienced any of it, but I love it.
yeah,
We'll
you
see. There's
humble.
there's
You're
a lot
just
of
humble.
there's a lot of richness in Tibetan Buddhism. Yeah.
You're just humble. Yeah, but yeah, you are into like a great deal of study and your effort. It shows up, and you're showing up. And I would like to know, like, there is some resources that I can get to delve deeper into that concludes everything, like, get the gist of like Buddhism and everything. And,
Yep.
that I was intrigued by that thought that you were telling about what if all of the beings that we see, experience are like much beyond, like those turquoise and beyond living that bodhicitta. And it reminded me of, the various channelings that I've heard. It may sound absurd, but like there have been like extraterrestrial contacts, and those beings have like light bodies, and like they have like telepathic contacts, and like they are like highly spiritual in nature. There is also like those of like sixth density beings that they do not require like a physical body to exist. They exist in a different plane, like astral plane, similar to that astral plane. So there's even social memory complex, and they follow like the law of one, like they experience the law of one. So there are like various altitudes of spiritual experiences. I am often intrigued by that.
Yeah, I would say to your first point about further resources, of course, I'm in a very specific thread of Tibetan Buddhism. It's Nyingma school, the ancient tradition held by specific lineage masters, Venerable Khenchen Palden Chair Rinpoche, Venerable Khenpo Sewon Donyo Rinpoche. They're often referred to as the Khenpo Rinpoches. And they have two books that I found super helpful amongst the plethora of Tibetan Buddhist and Buddhist content out there that's like reliable and beautiful and authentic and depends on people's connection and what they're interested in too. But there's two books. One is called 9 Golden Chariots. It's by Khenchen Palden Chair Rinpoche. I can put a link in here.
Perfect.
And it goes through the 9 vehicles, the 9 paths of study and practice, and like how the path 1 then expands and includes path 2, path 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and how what are the essential points of each kind of layer or world, and how the limitations of that world are kind of transcended and included to integrate even further to like a more inclusive wholeness. And so you get this like interlayered kind of, that's the Nyingma approach, the Nyingma tradition, that specific school.
Amazing.
9 vehicles.
Sounds
So that's called
amazing.
9 Golden Chariots. And it's very pithy. So it's like it's the blend. It's like a exceptional scholar who's writing in more colloquial kind of language so that it can be very kind of directly understood, which is beautiful. Like it has this kind of balance between meditator and they call it scholar practitioner in Tibetan Buddhism. That's one book. And then the second book by them is called The Nature of Mind, published by Shambhala. The Nature of Mind, Shambhala, that's the publisher. It's called Nature of Mind. And they, in that book, go through the so-called highest or the most inclusive, which actually means the most elegant and simple, Dzogchen. In Nyingma tradition, it's called Dzogchen, or the Great Completion, Great Perfection. And in that book, they go through the 9 different approaches to Dzogchen. The 9 different views you can take specifically to Dzogchen, and the methods that correlate with those views, depending on how much fullness, how much naturalness, like your state of mind and heart is. So that's also been like such a rich exploration book for me. Nature of Mind, 9 Golden Chariots. And then to your point about other entities and beings, and there's already so many on this earth we don't understand the languages of, right? And we're, to some degree trying to learn more. And then other off-planet things. I mean, Buddhism is just filled with different world systems and different kinds of beings. The 6 realms is like a standard, even most exoteric, in the most tangible version, outer version of Buddhism. There's all these 6 realms of hell beings, hungry ghosts, animals, humans, demigods, like these fighting gods, and then other gods. The god realms have 17 different planes. I mean, it's just like such an extensive
Seriously?
cosmology. And I find, like Sean S. Bjorn Hargens has said, he's found that in general, like integral Weberian move to go from me, us, all of us, cosmocentric. That cosmocentric with a K means like all manifest and unmanifest reality, basically. That he actually says this layer of cosmocentric with a C, cosmocentric, like the cosmos, the subtle dimensions or the kind of off-planet or interplanetary or different species dimensions, that there's, for good reason, in a lot of cases, it's not as highlighted, but it doesn't mean it's not there. And I think, and that's like just because it's more like down social time, and then I'll pass the mic to someone else. I have a feeling AI is about to show us that we're not at the top of the food chain.
Yeah, not seriously.
At least computationally, we already got beat, basically. And I'm not saying anything about its sentience or not, whether it's AGI, artificial general intelligence. I'm not even making any comment on that. But we're about to like be so multi-perspectively saturated with all kinds of worlds and content that for the most part isn't human usable. Like Stephen Wolfram, he creates this method called ruleology. It's like Wolfram Alpha. It's like he's a very computational kind of genius guy, Wolfram. He says the big problem with AI is going to be like taking all the computational output, creative combinations and taking that entire universe of stuff and just pinpointing the teeny little speck that actually human sense making can make any kind of sense of. He calls it human usable. And that's actually going to be a bottleneck. And I think more and more people are finding that in the information age with just like what filter to rely on. What's the reliable source of evidence or content? You know, we're already hitting that like very hardly, and that's caused in a large part a lot of hyperpolarization. Just like believing in different filter systems, whether it's Google or a politician or a certain economy system, whatever, there's all filter systems. But AI is about to, I mean, just it's interesting. If we don't have a reliable way of like actually, how can we trust filter systems? And how can I do it generously in ways with humility and confidence and courage and precision? It's not just anything goes, but like, and that's why integral methodology, in terms of not just a religious or spiritual context, but like the multi-perspectality or the like fullness of all these different knowledge sets interweaving. And that's almost like that collaboration is going to be almost the only way we thread the needle of dealing with a lot of these meta crises. We have to actually create this cooperation between these fields of knowledge that have different language systems that don't have a good track record of working together, because they require a lot of genius elements in a lot of different fields getting along and collaborating. It's a big task, but integral methodology, it's like perfect timing for it. And Vajrayana as a system of internested different ways of world making, world shaping, world kind of flexing is like an enactive system that I found also very helpful for that similar challenge of 21st century, everything everywhere all at once.
What I feel the issue with the cultural system is that the green, that the culture mostly is at, is like very surface level thing, it deconstruct everything that it is only surface and surfaces. And it is true that I also feel that, this integral meta theory it is the only thing that can add depth and, like such frameworks which can, help people, and make things understand that hierarchy is very much needed. The reality cannot exist without hierarchy, and the best hierarchy to go is the growth hierarchy. And
that said, and I would say to interrupt, and that said, if you don't come with turquoise integral or bodhicitta, really heart-based, like I'm in this for all of us kind of approach, integral becomes a monster that will eviscerate almost every ecology. because it will have the sensitivity to know exactly how to eviscerate the ecology, because it's that metasystemic. It's like that tuned in. If you don't consciously choose to have bodhicitta or a turquoise grounded approach, and to actually ground the power that comes with the integral methodology, you will become a Rudra, a Darth Vader. Like it's definitely a strong fork in the road. And that's a very, it's AI
It is also
alignment
very
problem,
difficult.
not to just
It is
keep bringing
also
it back to
very
AI.
difficult to keep be blind of those, things while being a turquoise, because at being a turquoise, you have that depth of perspective, like 5th or 6% perspective, that you cannot be blind to the pain of others. You are like too much empathetic, sympathetic to others. Like you just cannot, ignore the pain of others. I feel that, it comes with that, the perks of cons of being having too much consciousness is that you will have to feel others. You cannot go without
And
that.
I would say, and then if anyone else wants to jump in, we're these rich webs of worlds. And that means like any part of ourselves and all this infinite internested world making that we haven't consciously become aware of, which is like galaxies of content, then that those filter systems, those layering, that embeddedness is still, filtering or funneling our experience in a way that we just don't know about. So it's often called shadow, but like we can still come with a humble perspective. We can still come with a genuine empathetic, like heart-centered embodiedness, and still have so many blind spots. So that also means really the responsibility that comes with it, the being held accountable, like being willing to be held, like being willing to be an ecology the way the ecology works. Like that's actually the power of being a limited being, I found. Sometimes in Buddhism, people like throw out conduct as if that's not like an important thing. Like, why do I have to worry about how I show up in the world? Because like mind is like the sky, so it's all just a dream. But the power of being in an ecology, of like in a world, in a place, it could be in a room, a relationship. I mean, world has like very definitive features. The power of it is the world already has its own ways of flowing, its own ways of turning on and off, its seasons, its times, its do's and don'ts. Like every forest does, every river does, like every music has its rhythm, it has its pattern. Every game we play, we could call it a language game, an actual like basketball. Once we play that arbitrary game, once we say this is the boundary of my game, my rule, my ecology, my world, it automatically comes with rules, patterns, flow patterns, value structures. That's how worldviews seem to work when they create world spaces. It's arbitrary. Playing tennis is arbitrary. It can become basketball once you stop tennis. But the responsibility part is once you're in a world and you're showing up there responsibly, you can't be in the middle of a tennis game and change it into basketball. That breaks the ecology. It's bad blood. It's not good faith dynamics. You can't be in a Tibetan Buddhism and a Buddhism in general, in a debate, at the very beginning you agree about the topic of the debate, the way, or is this relative or absolute truth? Are we talking about a feature of this object? What feature? And you define the game. And then you debate. And any time during that conversation, when you break the initial agreement, you automatically lose. Because you switched from tennis to basketball mid-game. You can't do that. But so deconstructionism is always, there's all these games and multiple games and it's flexing and flowing. But to be an actual healthy green, you have to say, yes, it's all approximate. These are all just shifting, sliding surface features. And, depending on what layer of the leveling you're doing, it's all just approximate. It's all relative truth. Buddhism calls it artificial, relative truth, always partially true, right? With Wilbur, like big insight. And once you're in a world and you're agreeing to play in that world for that given time, it comes with rules and do's and don'ts. And if you want to show up as a good faith participant, which we all really, really need now, and we know it, our own internal integrity, it likes it when we're like trustworthy being. Like our goodness like knows that about itself. Then that's also one of the big high standards of like an integral in the world today. Showing up responsibly, being held accountable, being willing to be in checks and balances, actually being in the other world making of the beings that you're with, like with discernment when it's not a toxic dynamic. But thanks so much, Lynn. Do you want to go for it? I'm sorry, don't mean to hog all this. I'll like move fast between people. Lynn, go for it.
I want to see if I'm understanding this, because this might bring me back toward Tibetan Buddhism. As some people have said, we have this human headset. This is our interface. We cannot understand beyond this human thing we find ourselves in. So that's the rules of the game, sort of, we're playing. And then you said, unless we can transcend this, I understood it as like an live in bodhicitta or for the common good, we're kind of doomed. There's no other solution but to have bodhicitta. And so is that because certain masters like Longchenpa, Padmasambhava, they transcended this human headset and kind of lived in a vaster realm, and so they saw different things that they're trying to help us open up to, is my question. If that makes
And
sense.
it makes a lot of sense, and we can all throw around about it too if people want. Yeah, it's I really appreciate Ken Wilber's kind of his nuance with this, with the transcend and include. Like, what a powerful statement. I think what the great in Buddhism, at least, the noble beings who actually like say Longchenpa, or like you mentioned, or Guru Padmasambhava, then they can they play all the games, always carefully according to like what's helpful for the person who defines the feature of the game. If they're with a squirrel, they can show up in the squirrel game. If they're in a war zone, they can do the war zone version. If they need to speak Greek, they can speak Greek. If they need to have 4 arms, they can have 4 arms. Because those kind of beings, and this is just according to the teachings, they no longer believe that the game is the only way it is. It's not a first tier thing. There's not a real reality there. There's not a fixed final set. This is the truth of the thing. So they know it's game flexible. That's healthy green. It's constantly internesting worlds. And so the impulse isn't to get everyone to the game that is the true game. Like integral is the true game, and everyone needs to get to the integral game, and then we'll all save the day and the world will be happy. That's not how they work. They don't reify like that. They don't create dogmatic fundamentalist structures. They just don't have that kind of mode to fixate and freeze frame living currents of reality. But you can freeze frame it if it's helpful, and that's called a game. But when you freeze frame, you remember, oh, I push pause, and now we'll play this game, and then unpause, and the game shifts, and then enter the new game. They have that kind of flexibility. What do you think? Are you saying?
And in some Dzogchen teachings I've heard, on everything's a potential until my attention focuses on it. It's just happening so fast that I can't see it. So I'm creating everything that's happening. That I like it. I don't know it for sure. So form is emptiness, emptiness is form, but it's very fast. It's all like a hobby to see.
This is deep stuff. I mean, really, really deep stuff. And it has to be threaded really carefully because in Tibetan Buddhism, like I didn't mention it because usually it's too boring or just too much, but like there's 4 complete philosophical systems that are the bedrock of bodhicitta. Vaibhashika, Svatantrika, mind only, middle way. And so not even to go into those names much. The mind only school says everything we experience is mind. And there's multiple minds. It's what I experience is my mind, and what you experience is your mind. And there is interactivity between minds. So it's not what I experience and can like perceive of the ontology, the world I'm created, is like literally co-created by my mind. It's mind displaying itself and kind of setting its features in interactivity with other minds. So it's not only my mind. It's not just I want a Porsche, so I'm going to visualize the Porsche. Like, it actually has to be in play with other minds, like other cosmic grooves that are just happen to be mental, like mental or energetic. But then the next school up, mind only or middle way, Madhyamaka, which mentioned just briefly, this middle way is where bodhicitta is established. Everything is mind, but when you look for it closely, there's no actual mind you can find. And there's still awareness. And they call that the union of absolute and relative bodhicitta. It's just, there's love and compassion, but if you really try to find the boundary of love and compassion, it's unfindable. There's no one to have compassion for. There's no limit to the compassion. And yet all these things keep arising. Like, we keep including these displays, beings, places, times, textures. And so it's not just because there's a next level, a higher level of transcendence, doesn't mean all the sub-levels erase. There's still like the squirrel version and the dog version and however the stack is, you want to stack it. The thing is that's why deconstructionism, when green isn't toxic, it doesn't erase all the games. It says they're games, and if you play them with like responsibility and compassion and, you know, trust, you're a trustworthy player and like a good lighthearted, good sense of humor, and you remember it's just a game, then all of a sudden this kind of interdependence, this multiplicity of reality becomes like a lovely, kind of much more delightful, blissful experience, which is kind of naturally extends from middle way, the middle way school, into Tantra. That's when you start getting into like all of a sudden what seemed to be just pure suffering. And that's when the Tantra opens into, it's actually not pure suffering. Like, conditioned existence isn't suffering. Suffering comes from holding the game as if it's really real. Once you see it's just a game, all of a sudden it becomes delightful. I'm not saying I can do this, but these great masters that can, it becomes delightful. And the key features that define conditioned existence, their opposite is actually true. Because when you don't hold it that way, when you're actually are with it with bodhicitta, what was suffering actually is blissful. It's just, there's very specific features, like, and I don't have to go on that tangent there now. If people are interested, I could do in a bit, but these 4 features of conditioned existence, the 4 seals, they're called in Buddhism, their opposites are actually true in Sutra Mahayana when you get into bodhicitta teachings, the Buddha nature teachings, this innate goodness of all beings. Sorry, long answer, Lynn. Mary.
I have an opportunity, I think, right now, and I don't think I have the language for it, to work with my husband. Interestingly enough, he went to a MUFON meeting today, which is about extraterrestrials and so forth. And he said they were really talking a lot about AI, and they were talking about religion and meditation and all this. And I wanted to hear more from him what he was experiencing with it. And he says, "Well, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable." And I said, you don't believe it?" And he says, yeah, I believe it. I believe it. But it's unbelievable. And so it's like we're kind of grappling with that. It's exciting to me because I think there's something there that we have very different ways to come to the world, polarity wise, political wise, all of that. So I think his automatic gut reaction is, if I think it, no, it can't be, so I'm just trying to allow him to talk more about what he's doing and understand how he's, he has a good friend who is in this MUFON organization who, as much as I know about him, he's very, very conspiratorial and all this stuff. So just right now it's a little bit of a mumbo jumbo for me, but I think there's, you know, because he asked me once, he said, well, you don't believe in extraterrestrial, do you? And I said, well, sure I do. And you know, it's not, but it's not like, you know, instead of having 2 eyes, they have 3 eyes, and they do, you know, it's like he sees it in this different kind of encasement, and there's not really a question in there. I think it's just like maybe it's giving me an opportunity to, I don't know what. What do you think?
It has to, like, sharing space, sharing time, sharing worlds, it has to actually support both, you know, the multiple people in it, right? So like you can like to have an interest or a lightheartedness to be willing to like be with someone else's game or sense making or all that, like that's a nice entry disposition. It doesn't mean you have to believe in the game or really put a lot of time into the game, or like there's so many different ways to be in the world, like to have a genuine curiosity and like a curiousness, and like there's a lot of ways to do this, and I don't have the final answer. It also doesn't mean we have to full on let someone else's world like 100% shape us. And there's a fine line there where like if we're so attuned and we don't have discernment, where we get so attuned to someone else's world and we take it on as our own too much, and we get this overextension of empathy, this compassion fatigue, that's a very careful line. So, but I mean, with relationships, like, yeah, wow, how can you be in them? How can you not be in them? I mean, it's like we're in this. I'm married. We've going on 13, 14 something. So it's a lovely thing, and then like if to keep showing up, it depends. It's a lovely thing for me in our experience, and we keep kind of putting into it, and it's like we go through different things, and like we're changing beings, and we encourage that with one another. And if my wife came home and was like, you know, I'm going to donate all the funds to the space movement to go off to some other planet, that would be like a really serious conversation we would have. That would take a long time.
The lightness a little bit there, but yeah, okay. You know, that helps. I think that, oh, tell me more about this. And I have gone to, I went to 1 or 2 meetings when he used to go, like some years ago. So I am, I'm curious to see, you know, how it relates to some of the stuff that I'm doing and learning as well.
In Buddhism, a helpful thing for me has been the Buddha never said, turn your wisdom off. The whole path is keep your wisdom on and increase it. He never said, pause your wisdom. Oh, just don't look there. Don't ask those questions. He never, ever said that. Always prajna, or wisdom. Always keep opening prajna, or keep opening bodhicitta. So if you're ever in a context or in a game or in a relationship or in a world where like there's a really strong kickback that says, turn your wisdom off, that's always like a big, wait, what's happening here? I've found.
Yeah, he has a tendency to tell me that I don't understand it. And, you know, so well, tell me more about you, what you understand. You don't need to tell me about what I understand.
What do you think, Karen? I'm gonna pop out of the room for 1 minute and come right back. But Karen, go for it.
Yeah, I had something to throw in the pot with your conversation with Lynn about the whole question of are we creating the objective reality in some sense is our consciousness in some real sense creating objective reality? There's a lot to that. And I just wanted to throw, I had the good fortune to attend the Integral Conference in Denver 5.5 years ago, the What Now conference. It was over New Year's between 2017 and 2018. And we had a lovely dance on New Year's Eve. But one of the presentations that knocked my socks off was by some cognitive scientists who were using some really current cutting edge brain scanning imagery to show that when we have a visual perception, what we think is our visual field, and this is going to speak to what we call the myth of the given, that in first tier, in our early stage, we just assume that what we're perceiving out there is objectively real, and we are perceiving something that is what it is, and that's it. But so what these cognitive scientists presented at the conference 5.5 years ago was their research that showed through brain scans that when we, our brain, our optical centers create the visual image based on, input from our eyes, through our retinas, through our optic nerves and so on. And we think we're seeing what's out there. But in fact, only 20%, only 1/5 of the input into that visual image is through our optic nerves from our eyes. The other 80% that creates that visual image is, there were 4, and it went fast and I wasn't taking notes. 2 of them were memory and our memory centers, our emotional centers. And then there were 2 other that I don't even remember. So only just what we visually see out there, I'm looking out the window and seeing that tree and that bush and so on. Only 20% of that input is coming from my visual centers. Memory, emotion, and 2 other things which I wish I could remember. So even to that degree, even the hard cognitive science is verifying what our wisdom traditions have been saying, that we co-create our reality. Now we get into more esoteric stuff but that's just even hard science is working around to that point. So I wanted to throw that into the pot.
I love it, Karen, because I like to read and hear about dependent origination. Dragpa probably knows about that. And the Buddha talked about that, but it's not taught much in even the Buddhist circles. But somehow I'm very drawn to it. And like I'm saying, nanosecond, fast.
Yeah.
It is contact. It is feeling, which would be sort of the emotional part. It's perspective, which they associate with memory and naming. And so these scientists are kind of validating what the Buddha was talking about 2,600 years ago.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Is that on tape by any chance?
It might be. I'd have to check. I mean, Core DeVos, I think they taped everything.
Yeah.
So that would be fun to go back and see.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that stuff.
Yeah.
I just want to experience it, but I don't sit down long enough to get deep moving.
Hey, Eric, why don't you pop in?
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, hi. So, yeah, it's wonderful being with all of you and part of this rich discussion, and a lot of stuff percolating. Let me see how I formulate my question here. It's like a lot of different pieces coming together, and sometimes don't know what's going to come out until I say it. So, one of the things that I'm curious about is, which game do I choose to play? So picking up on that theme of like, there's a lot of games, and I can see to some small degree, like, yeah, they're just games, but then when I'm in playing, they feel a lot different when you're in the middle of them, right? So, but what I'm curious about is how I might avoid some of the games that it feels that I have a need to play. So, using the example of citizenship right now, I mean, I'm in the United States. I don't know if most of us are, but many anyway. And, it's like we've got a certain, situation in terms of where the country's going and what directions, for instance. Sometimes that can be really intimidating and scary. And I know that I can, find myself that part that wants to spiritually bypass. And it's like, oh, these other realms are a lot more interesting because I don't really have much skin in the game in that stuff. I mean, it is like, it can delight my mind and delight these other parts of me, but then I'm always coming back to like, oh, am I avoiding something that I need to be attending to that really is my responsibility? And how do I do that with integrity so that my explorations of these wider realms are coming about naturally and not coming about as an avoidance. So I'm echoing back to something that Lynn Feldman said earlier, and like one of the first questions tonight, and unfortunately she's not here right at the moment, but it stuck with me when she was talking about this empathy and feeling all this empathy for others, but she wasn't necessarily including herself because there was pain. I hope I'm representing that reasonably in the way that I recount what she said, but it resonated with me of what are the ways that because I could feel a lot of compassion for others, but when I look at it, it's like, wow, I've got all the pain and suffering in me too, that it's easier to be loving towards others than it is to really get into the depth of what that is in my own feeling. And so as you talk about this invitation, Dragpa, to addressing all of this with with humility, with with confidence, with courage, with precision. I'm looking at how do I choose and select the particular games that I immerse myself in and play in a way that has integrity. I mean, I made a choice to be here in this setting tonight when I could have done other things. I'm really thankful that I did, because I've learned so much. It's really, shaped me and touched things. It's activated things in my heart that feel important. It's like, oh yes, I could feel that impulse in the field of getting on back on track. It's like, okay, how do I, keep return to bodhicitta, and so it's kind of this open inquiry for me right now. I don't have the answers, but it's just like I'm trying to include in that intentionality that I don't get propelled by my own shadow and wanting to avoid things that are hard to face. So anyway, it's kind of something that comes up, and I'd be curious, any wise reflections, Dragpa, from you or from others in the group. We have so many wise beings here. I appreciate your inputs.
Two things that come to mind, and they're just two amongst a lot. Little moments of free play. I think so much of the challenge is like there's a lot to get really serious about. There's a lot that needs to be taken seriously because it's worthy of that much care. And we also still need to like have rejuvenative, refreshing kind of timeout, downtime, rest, yin, recoup, playtime modes. If we lose that part, we kind of lose the whole thing. We can't show up with the seriousness in a way that's actually flexible and heartfelt and responsive. So I think for me, I can have more of a tendency to get too tight, too serious, too intense. And so a little bit of a light touch, whatever helps with that for different people is different things. I think that's one basic thing that I found helpful for me. And then also some like little moments of non-doing. It's such a productive oriented time, right? There's so many things that really need a lot of attention, like a lot of help. To actually have like little pockets of non-doing. 5 minutes here and there, or 10 minutes or longer, where you just get to be. You just get to like be with being as opposed to having to do something. And I think not just for you, but for me and just for our culture at large, it's much more oriented towards doing. That's a healthy kind of balancing. And I think both those things for me, like a little more time for lighthearted free play, a little more time for just non-doing and just being with, like, what is this? I'm just going to be with it. I'm going to be with this pain. I'm going to be with this beauty or this ugliness, or I'm just going to be with it. That those help me have a little bit more attention, or like a little more kind of, they help me cue into like, well, okay, where I have limited resources, limited times, limited abilities, like where do I really want to put this and like kind of grow something deeply? Like it kind of clarifies some of that for me when I care for those two things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just I noticed too something that arises in insight, and again, I'm grateful for the field here that creates the occasion for something to come to me that I wouldn't have seen in myself before. But I notice how there is a way too that I give myself a certain solidity and sense of importance by, like, oh, I'm doing this important work in the world or whatever, and I don't have to, get distracted by all this stuff. And so, just to name that, because I'm seeing it more clearly in the moment, the egoic attachment to, this is my identity, and I'm important because of that or whatever. And so when you say the free play, it's like, oh yeah, okay. I don't do that very much, and so it's like, oh, busted. Good to be caught on that, not in a heavy-handed way, but just to to hold all of that a little bit more lightly, I think, is wise. And I saw you. I saw the expression on your face, Larry. Maybe you were noticing that too. You would have been one of those ones pointed that out to me for my edification.
What do you got, Larry?
Great inquiry here. Very appreciative. And thank you, Dragpa, for setting the stage for this inquiry I'll get back to you, Eric, in a second here. Dragpa, for setting the stage and enacting, in my experience, my opinion, my observation, enacting conversation about turquoise from a turquoise perspective. So thank you for doing that very nicely. Which game to play, Eric? What popped into my head was, who's the who trying to make the decision within you? Is it one of your personas? Is it, this goes for me too, is it your authentic self, which really isn't caught up in biases other than its own actuation, its own evolving, the authentic self? Who's the who trying to make the decision? And I'm not saying I'm an expert at this. This has been something I've been looking at when I get into, and it's easy on the internet. Oh my God, social media and YouTube and Substack, and oh my God, all these things that I can feel pulling me. And I'm getting better at looking at which part of me is being pulled. How healthy is that for Larry Keel? That part's being pulled, and then I make a judgment about that, I guess. How much do I want to engage really and put time into it? And sometimes being aware of myself in that process, it just slips away and I'm just caught up in it again. And so my learning is to get back aware, be present, and what are the dynamics in Larry that are playing out? Who's the who making the decision? Even about the World Health Organization and the just global treaty they're trying to do. And yeah, it's fascinating. It's juicy. And hopefully we can just become more aware of it without beating ourselves up about it, and just become more aware of our process. What are the ingredients? Like one of our personas, our authentic self, both in service of our whole self. Yeah,
thank you. I really appreciate that, Larry. As you were speaking, what I noticed is that just to use that model of persona and authentic self for the moment, that there might be a time when the authentic self is moving me in a particular direction, but then that gets co-opted by the persona or personas that then lay claim to that. So I think that sometimes there can be an authenticness to the initial impulse, but then how quickly that gets grabbed by a different aspect of me that then appropriates that for its own purposes. It's like, wow, that's really useful to watch that process, because it happens a lot. And the times when I'm in deeper reflection, and I've been trying to do sort of this soul work, a la, Terry Patton was one who, talked a lot about the integral soul work, something we're doing, another couple here from New Republic of the Heart community. you know, when I'm in that deeper space, I feel like I'm in touch with something, but then I'm not always in that state of in touch with that deeper place. So what takes over is this other part of me that's trying to lay claim to that, but it's not the same purity or quality to that impulse. And again, not anything to beat up. It's just a human process. I mean, I'm not making it bad or wrong or whatever. It's just like, oh, for in this service of clarity, how can I be more attuned to when that process unfolds in me and catch it and go like, oh, there I am playing that other game. Okay. Saw it, saw through it. Okay, move on. So I appreciate, yeah, just again, appreciation for the field in which there's real-time insight that I've had, two of them things that I might not have noticed otherwise because, we're doing that for one another here. So thank you. Thank you.
Folks, we're getting pretty close to 7 o'clock here. Maybe it is time to bring it to a close here. It's a wonderful discussion tonight. Love where it went. Does anybody have anything final they'd like to toss out before we go, or we be good?
Could I say one quick thing? Like it'll be
Sure.
short. Could we just pause for like a 30 seconds? Just like enjoy a field of silence here. And in Buddhism, there's often it's called dedication, where like if you did something you feel of value that's worthwhile, that was positive, that you like reactivate that initial motivation, the bodhicitta, this love and compassion and wisdom, and like really clearly, brightly, like may this, what we just did, what we just created together, what just happened, may this become the perfect supportive conditions for the natural goodness and intelligence of all beings to just fully manifest. May this be like beautiful condition for everyone's innate love and compassion and wisdom to just brightly, completely shine. Really much love to you all. Jerry, thanks for holding the space. Thanks, of course, to Tom. Thanks to Eloy. Thanks to each of you. It is an honor to be here with you all, and really deep gratitude. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, Dragpa. It's great having you. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Dragpa.
And
Thank you.
Good night. See you next time. For further information, including upcoming events, resources, links to our Facebook and Meetup pages, and our fabulous donate button, please visit our website at sandiegointegral.org. Donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue to provide information and connection within the Integral community.